Good afternoon. Our program will begin shortly. Once again, the program will begin shortly. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Ms. Adrienne Arsht, Atlantic Council Executive Vice Chair and founder of the Adrienne Arsht Latin America Center and Adrienne Arsht Rockefeller Foundation Resilience Center.
Mouthful. Good afternoon, buenas tardes, and I'm delighted to welcome you all here. Please start to eat. When I was doing my rehearsal, they were bringing in the dessert. It really looks good, but you have to eat your vegetables first. but please start. I'm delighted to welcome all of you here to the 4th annual conference during the United Nations General Assembly, which we all know as UNGA, where we're going to focus on the impact of global issues for Latin America and the Caribbean. This year, around the 77th UNGA, the Atlantic Council's Adrienne Arsht Latin America Center is partnering with the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center to spotlight the ripple effects of Russia's unprovoked and unjustified invasion of Ukraine. Russia's war on Ukraine has had profoundly destructive implications on the Ukrainian people and the neighboring countries. As well, the repercussions of this horrific act are being felt in every corner of the globe through food supply disruptions, higher energy costs, and political instability. In Latin America and the Caribbean, a region where all but 4 countries voted at the UN to condemn Russia's invasion, the implications of the war continue to be felt. Rising commodity prices, higher energy prices, increased food insecurity, and more expensive fertilizers are piling on to the region's already challenging post-COVID economic panorama. Robust continued international support for Ukraine must continue from around the world, including from our own hemisphere. As well, it is imperative that we begin this week in New York drawing attention to the importance of accelerating international focus on how to help Ukraine, as well as countries across this hemisphere, in managing and mitigating the economic impacts of the war. So, among our speakers today on this very timely topic, I'm particularly pleased that the President of Guatemala, Alejandro Giammattei, who visited Kiev just 2 months ago, will join us a little later to make closing remarks. I'm honored to welcome the Foreign Minister of Ukraine, Dmitry Kuleba, not sure where. And to welcome among our many distinguished speakers, the European Union's High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy and the Vice President of the European Commission, Josep Borrell. Guatemala's Foreign Minister, Mario Bucaro, and the U.S. Undersecretary for Economic Growth, Energy, and Environment, Jose Fernandez. To lead our discussion, I would like to now welcome Jason Marzak, the Senior Director of the Atlantic Council's Adrienne Arsht Latin America Center.
Please welcome Jason Marzak to moderate a conversation with U.S. Undersecretary Jose Fernandez, Ms. Lisa Schindler, and Mr. Martin Spicer on sustaining Latin America and the Caribbean's economic recovery in a global context.
Thank you, Adrienne, very much for your welcoming words. And none of this, Adrienne, would be possible without you and your incredible commitment to Latin America and the Caribbean. I'd also like to thank this afternoon's sponsor of today's program, Walmart, which is represented today by Paul Dyke, who will speak later in the program. Thank you for your support of this event and for all that Walmart does in Latin America and the Caribbean. And I'd also like to thank one of the newest partners of the Adrienne Arsht Latin America Center, which is Corporación Multiinversiones, who will also be part of our conversation. And in regard to the welcomes, I'd also like to extend a welcome to Assistant Secretary Brian Nichols, Assistant Secretary of Western Hemisphere Affairs at the State Department. Great to have you with us, Assistant Secretary. As well as welcome the members of our Advisory Council of the Adrienne Arsht Latin America Center who are here, Chairman Ed Royce, Marianne Walker, Jerry Mato, and also recognize Melanie Chen, board member of the Atlantic Council and the founder of our Caribbean Initiative, who are all here with us today. The consequences of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine are putting new strains on structural economic challenges seen across Latin America and the Caribbean, countries that have been overwhelmingly supportive of Ukraine. Rising inflation, alongside increased food and energy prices, is reaching the pockets of average citizens across the region. And it's also creating uncertainty as to whether the region will reach the same level of economic recovery that was previously anticipated. So we will answer these pivotal questions for our lunch guests and also all those watching via live stream. How might the region's economic direction be shifting, and how is Russia's war in Ukraine a factor? And what else can be done to help the region grow economically as it faces new global economic headwinds sparked by the war? We're going to do all of this in about 22 minutes, but we have three great speakers that can help us to answer those questions. And again, I'm delighted to welcome Jose Fernandez, the Undersecretary for Economic Growth, Energy, and the Environment at the State Department. And I'll also say on a personal note, someone I've had the pleasure to work with for a number of years. Jose is laser focused on getting things done. We've all seen that in your 13 months on the job and your previous positions as well. So great to have you here, Jose. We are also joined by Lisa Schneller, who's the Managing Director of Sovereign Ratings Department and also economist for Latin America at Standard & Poor's. And also, I will attest, an incredible voice on the region's economy, a longtime colleague. And finally, we're joined by Martin Spicer, the Regional Director for Latin America and the Caribbean at the International Finance Corporation. One point to keep in mind as we begin. As allies across the world, including the United States, European Union, and other longtime friends, further come together to support our hemisphere, it can have a triple effect. It can improve lives in our hemisphere while many people are struggling. Second, it can advance economic stability rather than social discontent. And third, help to maintain country support for Ukraine at this critical moment. Undersecretary Fernandez, Jose, let me begin with you. Earlier this year, Latin America was on track to recovering previous levels of GDP growth after 2 years of lockdowns and COVID restrictions that have hampered economic activity. And then on February 24th, Russia invaded Ukraine. You're frequently traveled to the region. Last week you were in Mexico, Costa Rica, and Panama. What are you seeing in regard to the spillover effects of the Russian war in Ukraine in our own region?
Thank you, Jason. It's good to be here. Good to be back in New York. I'm a big fan of Adrienne's, and you've done great work on the region, so thank you. We could go on forever. Let's just talk about three items. One, food security, the other one, energy, and the third, supply chains, all in 4 minutes. On food security, COVID hit Latin America the hardest. 8% of the population, over 30% of the fatalities. We saw countries and health frameworks that were weakened and were weak to begin with, and were weakened that could not cope with the ravages of COVID. What we have seen now with Russia's invasion of Ukraine is that that's been exacerbated, and that the recovery has been delayed, and that we have new issues to deal with. We are trying to help on the food security side. We are working on a number of partnerships in the region, but we have a problem. And the problem is that right now, and then maybe Paul will talk a little bit more about this, we have almost 270 million people in Latin America who are food insecure. In a region that was one of the successes for the last couple of decades was bringing 50 million plus people into the middle class. That is a progress that's been halted. We are doing what we can at the State Department. We're very proud of the fact that we've devoted over $6 billion in the last year or so to food security. Tomorrow, we're going to host a global COVID-19 supply chain conference where we will talk about some of the principles and some of the things that we can do together as nations on food security. But the fact of the matter is that a lot of the good work that was done in the last decade or so, 2 decades or so, has been set back by COVID. And so we'll talk part of the challenge, and then in the next few months, and Brian, I'm sure can talk about this more, is as we try and implement the America's Partnership for Economic Prosperity announced by President Biden in LA. That's something that we will be focusing on, laser focus on energy. It's both an opportunity and a setback for the fact of the matter is that we are asking countries all over the world to pump more oil at the same time that we are focusing on the clean energy future. The fact of the matter is that this is an opportunity for Latin America, but it's also it's something that means that we, at the end of the day, need to redouble our efforts. And this is in the energy, clean energy space. And this is especially so in the Caribbean, a region that's for a long time has had to rely on diesel fuels, and that we were hoping, and we are still hoping, to implement a number of clean energy initiatives there. I think let's not forget the fact that the clean energy future that we're all aiming to have means that a number of countries such as Argentina, Chile, and Bolivia that have lithium and other critical minerals that are important to the clean energy future will benefit from this. But it is still a challenge. Third, and this is what took me last week to Costa Rica, Panama, and Latin America, and Mexico. Supply chains. We saw in the COVID, and during the worst times of COVID, that Latin American supply chains broke down, especially on medical supplies. What we are trying to do going forward is to work with countries such as Brazil, Argentina, and Mexico to try to build up our pharmaceutical supply chains. The new Inflation Reduction Act gives us an opportunity to work with Canada and Mexico and a number of other countries in the region on electric vehicle batteries. That's an opportunity, and that's something that we will be focusing on. So I don't have a great number of answers, but I do know that the landscape has been changed by Russia's invasion. And I think it's up to us to try to make the best we can and also take advantages of the opportunities. And that's what we intend to do going forward.
Well, it sounds like, Jose, your leadership, State Department, is advancing a number of different initiatives that you laid out that could help to mitigate some of the shocks of Russia's invasion for Latin America and the Caribbean and U.S. partnership. We'll get into that in a moment. Lisa, let me turn to you. You have your fingers on the pulse of major macroeconomic and fiscal trends across the region. What may be surprising that our guests here in the room and also watching via live stream should keep in mind when you're thinking about what might be some of the major trends that could be coming down the road for the region and also things that you're seeing right now?
I think if you look back, and thank you so much for the invite. It's a pleasure to always be with the Atlantic Council. The region was clearly hit significantly. And in terms of the contraction of GDP and the recovery, for the top 6 economies in the region, the aggregate number shows, it's a 7% contraction, 7% recovery. But that masks a lot of diversity. And in many instances, subpar recoveries. And I'll highlight Mexico as being one of those, right? And I think if we look at the 3 largest economies in the region, Argentina, Brazil, and Mexico, all of them have structurally grown lower than they should. And in our view, the pandemic specifically exacerbated that in the case of Mexico, and it remains very much below pre-pandemic levels. And so that remains a challenge moving forward. I think we've seen recovery, better numbers in the first half of this year, but given the tone of the U.S. economy, the very complex global backdrop, inflation dynamics, we really see the region moving back into a slowdown next year. So on average, 3% this year for the top three, going lower, right? So that's not a positive message. There are pockets, though, and I would highlight Guatemala, who we'll hear more from later. Costa Rica, for example, the DR, those economies rebounded much more strongly than expected last year. Again, they'll be slowing this year, given the overall story. But I think those are some potential bright spots. Yeah. And I think that's where, dovetailing on the potential for nearshoring, I think that is a key element we need to think about moving forward. Fiscal positions are basically all significantly weaker. Debt to GDP ratios have risen from 10 to 20% in some cases. Mexico on the lower side, it wasn't a country that did a lot of fiscal stimulus. Now there are costs to that, but it does give it a sense of flexibility. Yeah. Guatemala, also a lower debt level, that gives it more flexibility.
And how has the changing global dynamics because of Russia's invasion, how has that altered some of the projections?
We have clearly inflation, right? You've seen, when you think of Brazil's inflation, peaking earlier this year at almost 12. Now they tightened significantly, right? So they now have real rates. So this is going to feed into the growth outlook, but they've brought it down several percentage points. But Costa Rica, for example, that had almost zero inflation, now running at 12%. This is a real challenge, and it's hitting the food, the energy. So there are social pressures. We saw the protests earlier this year in Panama. This complicates. So I would say the shocks we've had this year complicates the fiscal story moving forward even more. That took an important hit from the pandemic. And then that feeds into the politics and the election cycle, and then will you have consistent policy outcomes moving forward?
Yeah. Well, I think those are excellent points. The implications of Russia's invasion having repercussions in the economic, the fiscal space, which then has social implications and leads to then the questions of, how do we continue to maintain the support for Ukraine at this pivotal moment, while also showing the importance of partnership, as Jose was talking about the importance of U.S. partnership and other European allies with the region at this critical moment. Martin, let me go to you. At the International Finance Corporation, you're focused on private sector growth in developing countries to improve the lives for all. How have IFC investments and strategy toward Latin America, how have they evolved in the last couple of years? But in particular, how has your perspective in IFC investments started to change following February 24th, following the Russian invasion?
So over the last 3 years, the pandemic first, the invasion in Ukraine has, I think, changed the way many companies look at the potential, whether the local companies or international companies, and we have evolved with that changing evolution. There's three main areas where I would say we've leaned in more, particularly on climate and sustainability, particularly on the digital economy, and on nearshoring, what Jorge was mentioning. And these are related to the challenges, the development challenges that the region has been facing for many years in terms of inclusion. How do we get more people part of the formal economy? How do we get more people with access to health, education, food, and also with climate? And I've been working in the region for a number of years, and 8 years ago, I would have to convince companies that it was important to invest in new technologies with lower GHG emissions. Today, companies are coming to us and really asking for us for that type of support. On the digital economy, 20 years ago, the region was at the forefront of mobile technology and has, in many ways, fallen behind the rest of the world. And the digital economy is one way that countries and companies can provide access to services at lower cost. So these are the three areas that we're really focused on, and particularly after February, during the pandemic even, we had a strong focus on food security. And now we're continuing to support that, but with these themes of how can we help companies invest in more productive technologies that help improve the climate impact of companies. And the region really has an opportunity now to think about how can it address its underlying challenges as a result of what's happened through the pandemic and the invasion in Ukraine. And so that's where we're leaning in, helping invest in new technology, helping companies be at the forefront of climate, and helping on the productivity. So, we're starting to see more opportunities in Mexico to help bring investment and manufacturing to the southern states, which are half as wealthy as the northern states, and helping countries like Costa Rica go even further in pharmaceutical production, helping Colombia with its light manufacturing potential. So these areas of digital, nearshoring, and climate are the main focus of IFC in the region today.
Martin, let me just drill down for a moment on the IFC's work in agribusiness and food security. Food security is pivotal right now as people across the region face the challenges of scarce food supplies, rising prices. From your perspective of the IFC, what are some potential short-term and longer-term wins? How quickly can kind of private sector growth be marshaled to help to alleviate some of the food security crisis that we're seeing?
Food waste is one area where we're trying to work with companies that have new technologies that prolong the life of agricultural commodities from production to the table. In addition, on improving competitiveness so that producers can use less land with newer technologies to have less impact on climate and deforestation, which are, if you look at the impact that agriculture and land use and deforestry have in terms of GHGs for the region, it's 40 to 50%.
Yeah.
And so helping use existing land, already degraded land, to produce more rather than extending is one of the areas that we're doing it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Martin. Let me go back to you, Jose. You were traveling last week as we were discussing to Mexico and Costa Rica and Panama. Very successful trip, a very successful high-level economic dialogue in Mexico on Monday, so congratulations on that. You were mentioning as well, though, you were promoting U.S. investment, trade and supply chain diversification, and also you were commenting earlier about nearshoring. What are you seeing right now as the biggest on-the-ground opportunities for partnering with the United States as the global economy continues to change? And also, why is this more important than ever, from your perspective at State, that we, from the United States, focus on these partnerships across the region?
So the one change that we've had in the last month or so is the Inflation Reduction Act.
Yeah.
Almost $400 billion in clean energy investments have been enabled by that legislation. There is a provision that says that tax credits will be given to purchasers of electric vehicles in the U.S. if they're using batteries that are manufactured or based in minerals in free trade agreement countries. That's an opportunity for Mexico. That's an opportunity for Canada, and that's real money. In fact, we've received comments from countries that are not included that would love to be included in that piece of legislation.
That's always a good thing, right?
Part of the message that I took to Latin America is that let's make sure that we use that. And there's another piece of legislation, the CHIPS Act. The CHIPS Act has a lot of funding for U.S. chip manufacturing, but it has a small piece for the State Department. $500 million that we can use to leverage semiconductor nearshoring in partner countries. That's yet another opportunity. In Costa Rica, I visited an Intel plant. Intel left Costa Rica a few years ago. It's now come back. It's just in the last few months, it's hired 2,000 Costa Ricans in its new facilities. That's an opportunity, and we can do that. And I think the opportunity here is to make sure that others have skin in the game, so that it's not just U.S. funding, but also to make sure that it helps on something we've been trying to do for a long time, which is strengthen intra-Latin American trade. So, for example, the Alliance, the ADD countries, AD countries, the Alliance for Democracies in Development. I forget what the acronym is exactly, but it's the Dominican Republic, Ecuador, Panama, Costa Rica, and they can work together on supply chains. And let me just add one more thing from this trip. I think the combination of COVID and the pandemic has spotlighted the ills that we all knew existed in Latin America for a long time. What I heard in Costa Rica from countries that want to invest there in semiconductors is we need better educational systems. We have a problem getting enough trained employees. In other countries, the issue of corruption is still huge. I still remember a study from Fernandez a couple of years ago that said that 3 to 4% of the GDP, not the budget, the GDP of the Northern Triangle countries was spent in corruption in the healthcare procurement system alone. That's something that they can't afford. The last is tax. Countries need to be able to fund themselves, and that we've known these three things were problems, and I think there's an urgency now that we need to address.
Well, I want to thank this incredible panel for opening our conversation today. We could, of course, continue this conversation, but we have a number of other speakers that will be joining us throughout the afternoon. So thank you all. We're going to take a break and return in a few minutes. But again, thank you, Undersecretary Fernandez, Lisa Schniller, and Martin Spicer for kicking off this conversation.
Please welcome Senior Director for the Eurasia Center, Ambassador John Herbst, to moderate a conversation with European Union High Representative Joseph Borrell, Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmitrio Kuleba, and Guatemalan Foreign Minister Mario Bucaro on transatlantic reflections on Russia's war in Ukraine.
Good afternoon. As noted, my name is John Herbst. I run the Eurasia Center at the Atlantic Council. I'd like to thank Jason Marsock and the Latin America Center for working with us, or rather allowing us to work with them on this event. And we've got three distinguished speakers. We have, as already mentioned, the EU High Commissioner, High Representative Josep Borrell, who has been in that position since December of 2019, and before that he was a Spanish Foreign Minister, and the President of the European Parliament. We have Foreign Minister Mario Bucaro of Guatemala. He's been Foreign Minister since February of this year, so congratulations, Mr. Minister. Career diplomat, so my sympathies are with him. Ambassador prior to Mexico, Israel, Bulgaria, and Cyprus. And then immediately to my right, we have Foreign Minister Dmitrio Kuleba of Ukraine, Foreign Minister since March of 2020. Before that, he was the Deputy Prime Minister for European Relations from August of 19 to March of 20, and also, like the minister, a career diplomat. So let's start. And Mr. Borrell, start with you. Why it is important to bring Latin American leaders into the conversation about responding to Kremlin aggression in Ukraine?
It's self-evident, no? It's self-evident, but it's a good occasion for you, Dimitro, to explain to Latin American people what this war represents, because people today are much more concerned about the consequences of the war than the causes of the war. People don't care a lot about, yes, okay, Russia, very bad, to invade the neighbor, these kinds of things should not be happening, but look, which are the consequences of that? And for the Latin American region, the consequences are very bad. the lowest growth rate in the world, the lowest, just 1.8. The highest inflation rate on the last 15 years, a big bust on the extreme poverty and the risk of famine. There were 4 million people before the pandemic, 8 million after the pandemic, almost 30 million now. So the economic shock is very big, transmitted through the channels of prices, energy, and food. Not gas. Gas is for us, Europeans. For them is oil and food, and mainly fertilizers. So the region is in big stress. And the financial problems, high interest rate, just another figure. The region has lost on capital outflows twice the amount of special growth, twice. So we have to explain to the region that this is happening, but it's not the consequences of the sanctions. Mike doesn't work. It's not the consequences of the sanctions like the Russian narrative want to convince people around the world, but the war itself and the blockade of Ukrainian grain and fertilizers. So this is a good moment to keep in touch with our Latin American friends and to make them to engage more politically. Certainly in Latin America, only 3 countries, the usual ones, Nicaragua, Venezuela, and Cuba, abstained, not even voted against in the United Nations, only abstained. All others were very much supporting. But this support was decreasing when it came the moment to tell Russia out of the Human Rights Council. And there is a certain feeling, I've been talking with my colleagues about can we bear the consequences of this war? And in this case, which is the way out? Because people want the war to finish and finish soon, but how? And we have to defend the idea that Russia cannot win this war. Russia cannot invade the neighbor and get some part of it. This is the important message that you have, I think, that we have to pass to the international community, and most especially to Latin America. And we will support Latin American countries on the green revolution, digital revolution, facing the challenges of food insecurity. Everything will be on the table, but now what we need from Latin American people is a strong commitment to support international law, to support the inviolability of the borders, the territorial integrity, the sovereignty. Latin American people are very much attached to it because they have been suffering in the past attacks to their sovereignty and territorial integrity. So this is a good moment to show that these principles are universal, they are value for everyone, and in particular for a country like Ukraine in this very, very challenging moment.
Thank you. Okay, Minister Kuleba, a similar question. Why is Moscow's aggression important for Latin America, and for you, for that matter?
Well, I don't think the importance is linked to any specific region. I think the threat that the Russian aggression poses to the world is equally important whether you are in Asia, in Africa, or in Latin America. I think there are 2 particular global repercussions. First, if Russia, being the permanent member of the UN Security Council, succeeds in invading another member of the United Nations, a peaceful country, then everyone in the world, irrespective of the geography, who wants to solve problems by force will be tempted to follow the Russian example. Because if Russia got away easily with it, why shouldn't I give it a try? And I will not be dwelling about the destruction of international law. I think all of this is self-obvious. But those who are trying to consider this Russian aggression from the realpolitik perspective, they should think in these terms. If Russia can do it, then why someone else shouldn't be tempted to follow the suit? And of course, before 2022, the world, it seemed to the world that Ukraine, as part of the global economy, doesn't exist. And the only reason for that is because everything worked perfectly fine. The moment Russia attacked Ukraine, we faced and blocked our ports. All of the world realized that exports of Ukrainian agricultural products are essential for maintaining global price stability, for saving people from hunger across the globe. So I also believe that it's important to put the Russian aggression to an end, to avoid inflation, to avoid hiking food crisis and hunger in many other parts of the world, because everything is interconnected. Otherwise, I think everyone here in this room and in governments of Latin America countries are all well-educated people. They perfectly understand what's going on. They perfectly understand who is responsible. We see it. But then every country makes a decision, how far am I ready to go in supporting Ukraine? And this is where real faces come up. This is where you see who stands where and on what. And we start asking ourselves a question, for example, if a country votes in favor of the UN General Assembly resolution that speaks in the strongest possible terms about the Russian aggression, but that's it, and then the country stops and says, this is it, we're not going to do anything more, with a list of reasons why. The question is then not to us. I don't have to convince anyone why you have to support Ukraine, because the case is absolutely obvious. The question is then, how much does it speak about the principles and the policy that a certain country defends? We are bearing, I'm hearing from different corners words about the economic difficulties brought by the Russian aggression. And I share what Joseph said, that we should be very clear in explaining the reason of these economic difficulties. It's not the sanctions. This is not about it. Sanctions is the response. It's not the cause of the problem. But the real question is very simple. If we want to keep the world run by the rules where even the strongest knows that he cannot get away with his blunt violation of rules existing in this world, then you have to support Ukraine. And I understand that every government cares for its ratings, for its public support, inflation, prices, energy prices, they all matter. But we are all in the same boat. This is something that I want people in Latin America to understand. The only difference between us and you is that while we are being attacked by Russian missiles and tanks, you are being attacked by inflation and energy crisis caused by Russian policies in the world. And if you look at it from this perception, probably you will be more keen to stand by our side in this struggle. Thank you.
Thank you. Minister Bukharo, you accompanied your president, Giammattei, to Ukraine in July. Guatemala is also one of the few countries in the region to explicitly criticize Russia, co-sign the OAS declaration on Russia's war in Ukraine. You sponsored an UNGA resolution on Ukraine. You voted to reprimand Russia in the UNGA and voted to suspend Russia from the UNHCR. Why is Guatemala so invested in this war that is happening thousands of miles away? And how is Russia's war in Ukraine affecting Guatemala and Latin America?
Thank you so much, Ambassador, and thank you to the Atlantic Council for this opportunity. The word is commitment, is principles, is to be on the right side of history, is to do what is right. You know, Guatemala, for 36 years, we live a civil war, brother with brother fighting for democracy. So we know what is war, and so it's a principle of peace. Then we talk about sovereignty, and that's the reason that we are so vocal about the opportunity that we have today to do what is right. And, you know, why I'm here is for the great example of a great leader like President Javier Matei that you're going to meet, and in the passion that he has to talk about peace issues, sovereignty, and territorial integrity that we are facing. But the message that we are bringing today is that it can be done. If a small country like Guatemala can do it, anyone can do it, because it's the right thing to do, and how we can be able to do it together. And Dimitro and I, we became very close friends because the first call that I did when I was a Minister of Foreign Affairs, it was to him. He says, how can I serve you? And he says, I need the voice in Spanish in Latin America. I say, you have it. And then when the 24th of February, the invasion came, we were the first to be vocal and then to activate all our missions around the world. And says, this cannot be tolerated. And we raised the voice for Ukraine in Spanish, in English, in French, and all these languages that we can be able to have in this multilateral thing. Then we activated how can we be able to coordinate these efforts to make a strong message. Think about it, to expel Russia from OEAS as a permanent observer. It was not just Guatemala, it was Antigua Barbuda together, and we get the votes to be able to do that, and that was a strong message. Maybe we cannot do it in the UN, but we can do it in our region because we will not tolerate that this can be able to happen. And then we realized, how can we be able to talk about the issues if we were not present? So we decided to travel to Ukraine. But you know, one of the things that I always remember from my speech with Dimitro and with President Zelensky when we were there is he says, Mario, you know, one of the things that I truly value that you come when we were not winning the war. Because many people come when we were winning. And you came in the most difficult time for us. And now that you're winning, we're here also, Dimitro. We will be with you always. So for us, and I want to end with this, these three principles, peace, sovereignty, and territorial integrity, is something that we have lived in our history. But the commitment that we all have is what Joseph and Dimitro have said. We are all part of the world because the world is interconnected. And this room represents that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Mr. High Representative, how do you see EU cooperation with Latin America in dealing with the challenges arising from this war and perhaps other out-of-area crises?
Look, I am Spanish, so for me, Latin America is something that it's very much close to my heart, my culture, my history. But I think that the Europeans, we have been practicing a certain benign neglect with Latin America. Since we are so close, we don't have to care. And we have to care. And it's funny because the European firms have invested in Latin America more than in China, in India, in Japan, and in Russia together. It looks funny, but it's true. Our firms have been putting a lot of capital in Latin America. Our presence as investors are overwhelming. But our political focus on Latin America is not as big as it needed. And I hope that in next October in Argentina, we will continue working on building a stronger relationship between Europe. Europe is not just Spain and Portugal. Europe goes to the Russian border. And we are 27, we are 28, 27 now. And we have to engage more with Latin America. And this war is a good occasion for that. This was a good occasion in order to show the transatlantic relationship is not just the North Atlantic relationship. There's another transatlantic relationship, the Southern Atlantic, and this has to be enhanced. And this is a good moment for that because we are talking about the hardcore of politics, war, territorial integrity, sovereignty. And our Latin American friends, you do, but others are a little bit less reluctant, have to understand that this is a moment in which they have to show their commitment with international law, with the Charter of the United Nations, and with the basic principles that sustain peace and cooperation in the world. We work a lot with Latin America on digital. We are building cables, optic fiber, to connect Latin American countries with Europe. We have a lot of prospects for energy cooperation because Latin America will be one of the biggest providers of hydrogen. And we hope that some Latin American countries can provide us with some more gas, because the big problem that we are facing in Europe today, as you know, is the risk of not having gas in winter. And Putin is waiting for General Winter. You know, General Winter has always come to the rescue of the Russian army. When things were difficult for them, Napoleon, Hitler, General Winter came. And he's waiting for General Winter, believing that we Europeans will be weakening if we face a prospect of low temperatures and not enough supply gas. So we will resist low temperatures if needed. We have to strengthen our links with you, with Latin America, because history is not enough, language, culture, religion is not enough. We have to look to the future, and I think that the strong partnership between democratic countries abiding by the United Nations Charter is a good way of enhancing our political relationship.
Thank you for that comprehensive answer. But you should never do this in public, but I will do it anyway. I'm a bit confused because we seem to have lost 8 or 9 minutes on the clock. So do I have time for another question? I'll take no as a yes. Actually, I'll take no answer as a yes. So, Mr. Minister Kuleba, what is the challenge for Ukrainian diplomacy in Latin America?
In Latin America, since the war began, I became particularly reluctant to generalize regions and even some countries. So there are countries like Guatemala who support us because they believe, rightly so, that we are all on the right side of history defending the right cause. There are countries who are very friendly and supportive behind the scenes. It's like putting a hand and saying, we are with you. And there are countries who are politically supporting, are more kind of Russia-leaning in their narratives. But again, we had a famous football coach who used to say, the score is on the screen. And when you have a vote in the United Nations General Assembly resolution, the score is on the screen. And we see that, except some countries which Josep mentioned, usual suspects, right, Latin America supports the principles and that we are all defending because they are the principles of the UN Charter. The problem is how to make a country move from supporting the UN General something in the UN General Assembly and not supporting it in a different format. I will give you a quick example. We have a Crimea platform, an international gathering event, a summit, focused specifically on the issue of Crimean Peninsula illegally occupied by Russia in 2014. And it's interesting to see how countries who sign up under the same language in the United Nations are reluctant to join the Crimea platform and sign under the same language in a different format. And the argument I'm hearing from some of the colleagues is that we will continue supporting you in the UN, but not anywhere else. And this is the challenge in dealing with these countries. I think it's a very nice professional challenge too, how to make a country make a step forward and do more than what is being done under the umbrella of the United Nations.
That's a very interesting answer. Thank you. I'm told that it's now time to close down this panel. I thank our panelists. I thank also Minister Bujarro for not having, I apologize for not giving you a second question, but thank you all. Thank you, and thank the audience for immediately quieting down at the start.
Sorry. Please welcome Bloomberg's Anne-Marie Hordern to moderate a conversation with USAID Assistant Administrator Marcela Escobari, Mr. Paul Dyke, and Mr. Edgar Villanueva on rising inflation and food insecurity.
Thank you so much, and thank you to Adrienne and Jason for inviting me from Bloomberg to moderate this panel. I think the previous panel really outlined, obviously, the consequences around the world countries and economies are facing. Every day we talk about the gas and oil crisis happening in Europe and around the world, but really for Latin America, that crisis has to do with fertilizers. Chile is the only country in the region that produces more than half of the fertilizers it uses, so everything else is imported. In most countries, it's about at least 90% or more imports. And while this not only affects their own economies, it also affects those countries like Brazil, who are major exporters of actual food. So there's really a big problem both at home, but also it has all of its global challenges. Thank you so much for my esteemed panelists. Marcel, I'd like to start with you. Marcela, you know the region so well. You also know the economics of the region. It was the COVID-19 pandemic. There's a lot of even civil unrest with some economies already. And then, of course, it's the consequences of these sanctions on Russia. Can you just give us a broad outline of what is this doing in terms of inflation, prices, and what does that mean for food security in the region?
Thank you, Anne-Marie. And this was mentioned in our first panel, right? That Putin's invasion to Ukraine really hit an already fragile hemisphere, right? Those people that have severe food insecurity, people who haven't eaten in a day and have no availability of food, actually doubled from 2014 to 2020 to 90 million people, right? And then we have the inflation, we have the tripling of fertilizer prices, we have increases in food prices. And let me give you just a couple very clear examples of what this means, right? In Guatemala, in the Western Highlands, fertilizer prices have increased 300%. Food prices of maize and beans, which are the staples, have increased 50%, right? So it is those farmers whose fertilizer has increased 300% that are making decisions right now on whether they're going to farm today, and that's going to affect food supply for many of their communities. And to give you another example, in Haiti, right, we are seeing riots this week due to the lifting of subsidies of fuel. And we know that these riots and this violence have been used for political purposes, but it just shows how dangerous food insecurity is in a place that is already pretty fragile and complex. And just to finish, like, the food crisis has hit Latin America in two ways, right? We have very vulnerable countries, particularly the Caribbean, that imports a lot of its foods. And then we have Brazil and Argentina, which are the breadbaskets of Latin America and the world. So we do hope that this is an opportunity for these countries to rise to the occasion, and we really do hope that Argentina in particular is just critically views some of its policies around export controls, because this is really a time for them to rise up in a time of need for the region.
And Paul, I want to ask you, as being from Walmart, you guys are really on the front lines of an inflation story in terms of seeing the demands for what you're selling and if consumers are able to pay for it. But for Walmart, their biggest presence outside the United States is Mexico and Central America. So what are you seeing, and how are you mitigating these spikes we're seeing in consumer products?
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate the opportunity to participate. Yeah, it's interesting for us in Walmart for the last number of years. I mean, all of the disruptions we've talked about in the supply chain, of course, have impacted us directly. Pandemic, of course, or even bilateral disruptions and tariffs and things like that directly affected us. With Russia, Ukraine, where we don't have any retail operations in Russia or Ukraine, not a big part of our supply chain. You could have, for a minute when that crisis started, thinking, oh, well, this one's not going to affect us like these others. But of course, that's not true, because we operate in more than 20 markets throughout the world, and while we have different businesses within those markets, what is consistent about those markets is we're serving customers who are very much impacted by inflation. And in each of those markets, we're a big food retailer. Walmart, initially in our history, we weren't, but now food is up to a half or more of our operation. So, of course, we're seeing the impacts of inflation in every market that we operate. As you mentioned, Mexico is our largest market outside the U.S. Now, there's a couple things. One, I'd say from a Walmart perspective, as far as mitigating it, as you asked, the good news is, Walmart's DNA, back to our founder, Sam Walton, was about, offering good products, low prices for our customers. And that's, from our founder to our current CEO, Doug McMillan, who described it that way recently, is, it's in our DNA. Everything is part of just running our business. It's about, working with our suppliers, getting the lowest costs possible. And that's good, but we're obviously now in, extraordinary times with the high levels of inflation. So, we've realized while, the way we run our business is, does help push down costs, we've got to do more. So if you think about Mexico, where we've worked with the government and we've identified a basket of the most essential products that your average family will need week to week just to get by on groceries, approximately 50 items, where we've, prices will not go up on that basket of products. They will only stay the same or go down. A similar initiative in Chile, the same way. Again, it's what are those products that people are coming to our stores that they just need. They're not nice to haves, they're must haves, where we're capping the prices on those as one way. And a third, and I'll stop there because I know we don't have much time, but our suppliers in all of these markets are the backbone of how we can serve our customers, and so a lot of effort going into how we can support suppliers during this time as well, but I'll leave it at that.
Just quickly, on the price controls that you work with the government about, do you see that because of that there's more demand for those products and people are shying away from the items that the prices have gone up?
I won't comment on those specific products because I don't want to give me this thing. I will say generally within Walmart, there's no question that what we're seeing now, and this is true Latin America, this is true in the United States, Canada, any market where we operate, that basic goods, food and otherwise, absolutely are. We're seeing more sales on that, less sales on the discretionary items. So generally, that's actually the case.
Edgar, you are at CMI Group. It's an agro-industrial company, but if you're a DC native, they also own Pollo Campero, yes? Okay. Campero, yes. Which is very popular. You should check it out. Kind of a similar question to you about mitigating, but how could your company make sure that people are going to be able to eat this winter? I mean, the numbers Marcella went through are devastating and horrific, and the concern is that it'll just only get worse in the coming months.
Well, there's a wide array of things that the companies can do, but I think that I can start by saying that pivoting of things that Martin said, things that Lisa said, CMI is a company that has investments not only in energy, renewable energy, but also a big footprint in foods. So in the issue of food security, first I want to say that we need to have a comprehensive approach on what we do about food security. We need to come together, governments, private sector, experts, international organizations, and really look at it as something that we need to do comprehensively. Second, I think that from a company standpoint, there's two things that we can do. Thanks. There's two things that we can do, but the key word is efficiency. The first one is diversification. Depending on the type of company that you are, you sell a particular type of product. But trying to get products that cater to the bottom of the pyramid is something that companies like CMI can do. Another one has to do with sustainability. if we have a commitment to sustainability in which we are using water better, using land better, I think Martin was the one who addressed it, there is also something that we can do to impact food security if we're committed to do that. In the case of CMI, last week we announced a $1.8 billion investment in Latin America, most of it in Central America, also some of it in the United States. And that investment is going to go to three things. First, technology and innovation to be more efficient. The second one is going to go to product diversification so that we have products that can also cater to the bottom of the pyramid in the lowest income bracket so that they can also have access to food. And the third one is a big commitment on sustainability. We really want to be a company that has a wide array of quality products, but that also targets a specific sector that now is having trouble and that is in need.
And for you and Paul, I want to ask you this question about supply chains, because the pandemic obviously ripped up the script and how we get our products, and then really adding fuel to the fire was Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Have you rethought your supply chains in Latin America because of this? How have you had to adapt?
Well, we have, I think Paul's is going to answer the specific question better than I, because we have a success story in that sense. CMI depends on import of grains a lot. To give you an example, we import about $1 billion in wheat from the United States every year. So that dependency made us get ready for these types of things way before they happen. We have a special unit that is devoted to commodities and that spends 100% of its time thinking on how we can be sourced through these types of challenges. So I think that on the side of CMI, what we can offer in these laterals and in groups where we're thinking about these challenges is expertise on how to address these types of challenges by committing to buy purchases that are longer and by doing it in a way in which you're very strategic about it. Now, in bringing supply chains to the region, I think it's something that we need to be doing, in which our company would play a role that is very important, and that we need to be doing it actively instead of just having a conversation and then going back to our usual lives.
Paul, is that something Walmart's thinking about doing, bringing more of these facilities to Latin America, nearshoring?
Yeah, well, interestingly, and Adrienne and I were talking about this just a few minutes ago, which people are usually surprised by this, is in any given market where Walmart is operating, most of what we source is sourced locally. Even in the U.S., 2/3 of what we'll buy at Walmart in the U.S. is sourced in the U.S., and in markets outside of the U.S., that's usually 90+%. So we do have fairly local supply chains. No question that and even really before the pandemic, while that certainly exacerbated things, we had started a process at Walmart where we know we've got to have very diversified supply chains to deal with the challenges. No question, the pandemic really brought that home, and that's an effort that's ongoing, and we want to have we do want to source as much as we can locally. We can't source everything locally, and so we do want to have a diversified and resilient supply chain. But on the local, our supply chains are only as good as our suppliers. And one thing is, we know that we need a inclusive supply chain where, whether it's very small suppliers, women-owned suppliers, there are barriers to entering a supply chain, whether it's for domestic or for export. And that's one area where we're really investing in our supply chains and markets, is to give people the tools to be able to supply to Walmart or to any competitor. And again, that's from the very small to large, through different channels, whether it's e-commerce or whether it's through our stores. So that's somewhere where we know, as we're dealing with these challenges, if we've got a large inclusive supply base, that's going to be good for Walmart, that's going to be good for our customers, and it's going to be good for the markets where we operate.
Marcelo, we spoke a little bit before about what the U.S. is doing in this regards, specifically on food security. How is the U.S. Helping Latin American allies and countries fight this?
No, thank you. I think this is loud enough, huh? I love it.
Yours is working.
Yeah, this is perfect. No, look, as we've discussed here and my colleagues have discussed, solving food insecurity, you need to do it at a variety of levels, right? The policy level, the supply chains, nutritional information, and on-farm practices. We work at all those levels. A lot of our work focuses on smallholder farmers, particularly because they are very vulnerable and because, as we said, their choices will determine whether people will eat, the next season. And we help them with technology. Right now, we're really focused on efficient use of fertilizers because many farmers overuse fertilizer or don't necessarily use the right nutrients to their particular soil. And now they're a lot more receptive to those changes in practices. But also drip irrigation, which can triple yields, or the use of bioproducts that they can produce locally so they don't have to import pest control or fertilizers. And those kind of interventions are really helping on the yield, on the productivity, and being creative given the fertilizer prices. But we're also trying to be creative. We just launched a successful engagement with Brazil's Agricultural Research Institute to create new fertilizers technology so that they can stop importing all of their fertilizer just for themselves and for exports around the region. So I really hope that we can continue to be creative in responding to this crisis. And we're grateful to the Ukrainian supplemental that has given us a bit more funding to be able to engage right now with those in need around the region.
And I just want to end with you on the humanitarian toll. Especially in the news, there's been obviously lots of images, devastating images of asylum seekers, migrants going in these hospital places to try to reach the United States. How has the pandemic and also the war exacerbated this problem?
Look, the war, the pandemic, it's one crisis after another, and as people have said, Latin America has been hit disproportionately. So I do think that, of course, when you have violence and economic insecurity, it does affect migration. I think what we know in the trends right now that the largest migration outflows are coming out of Venezuela and other authoritative regimes. And there are ways that we're working within the region. Some of the most innovative countries, generous countries are in the region. They're accepting Venezuelans who make up 6 out of the 7 million migrants that have been displaced, and we're helping them integrate into these societies. So at a time of need, I think the region is really rising up, and we're trying to help. And I think if we act proactively, I think we can deal with the migration flows, but most importantly, the root causes of it, right? Instability, poverty, and these authoritative regimes.
Right. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you.
Please welcome Fred Kemp, President and CEO of the Atlantic Council.
Greetings to you all. I just had a conversation with Foreign Minister Kuleba, and he said, I just can't thank the Atlantic Council enough. These are the kinds of conversations we need with our European partners, with our Latin American partners, with our global partners. It's a little different when you're meeting one-on-one, when you're bilateral in the side room, when you're meeting somewhere here, than if you're giving one speech after another, as important as those speeches are at the United Nations. And I said to him, I said, you know, it's pretty important that the UN General Assembly voted to allow President Zelensky to speak over the objections of the UN Security Council member, Russia. I said, but what's more important is the 101-7 vote, because it really shows the earth is moving, and it is showing that it's harder and harder for people to justify their support for Vladimir Putin. The Atlantic Council is focused on turning ideas into action. That's what this is about. That's what a lot of our activity this week in New York is about. We see the interconnection of everything. When the despot Putin violates international law in one part of the world, when Putin takes the sovereignty of a democratic, free country against violating the UN Charter, it's not just an issue for everybody. We now see it has an economic impact on people, it has an energy security impact on people, it has a food security impact on people. Even before Russia invaded Ukraine, the Atlantic Council was focused on how we can be even stronger partners of Ukraine, for Ukraine itself, but also for everything that's at stake in terms of our common values. It's my hope now that this important event will advance further transatlantic cooperation on sustaining support for Ukraine and mitigating the reverberations of the war, with High Representative Borrell, Foreign Minister Kuleba, and of course now President Alejandro Giammattei. The President, and it's my honor to introduce the President this afternoon, and let me give you a very warm welcome from all of us here in the room and everyone across the Atlantic Council. This is the third time since 2020 that the Atlantic Council has hosted you, but we are delighted for this first opportunity to host you in person, and of course in New York at the UN General Assembly. President Giammattei has a long and distinguished record of service to the citizens of Guatemala as a medical doctor, as a firefighter, as a coordinator of electoral processes, as a director of public urban transport. He's worn a lot of hats. He was elected in 2019 and took office in January of 2020, just months before the COVID-19 pandemic hit. Under his leadership, the President was able to avoid a significant pandemic-induced economic contraction. And last year, the largest Central American economy experienced strong economic reactivation and recovery of around 8%. That's a lot of growth. And you've got the ministers here who can also take a lot of credit for this incredible work, but it really is your country. On Ukraine, the President has led by example and was the first head of state from Latin America and the Caribbean to travel to Kiev and demonstrate solidarity with President Zelensky. The President just gave me a little bit of a insight into his 133-hour trip. And so maybe he'll share some of that with you as well. Minister Kuleba and the Ukrainian people are fighting to preserve their lives, their honor, their independence, and their democracy, and to have that kind of visit from that part of the world makes a lot of difference. The United States and Guatemala are close partners with futures intertwined. And we talked a lot about how the Atlantic Council can help at this very interesting moment in Guatemalan history. We need each other, and we're stronger in friendship. So on behalf of our Executive Vice President of the Atlantic Council and founder of the Arsht Latin America Center, Adrienne Arsht, on behalf of the Senior Director of the Arsht Latin America Center, Jason Marsak, and all my colleagues around this room, thank you for being here. Senor Presidente, for your leadership, thank you, and for your presence here today. And let me turn the podium to you.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. I will speak in Spanish because it's better for me. With somebody, you're going to help me to translate. Yes, I've been in Kiev, 133 hours travel, 2 nights in airplanes, 2 nights in train, and 2 nights in hotels. One in the going to Poland, and one here in New York when I'm back. Es un honor para mí, en representación del pueblo y el gobierno de la República de Guatemala, ser parte de este importante evento de ustedes.
It is an honor for me to represent the people and government of the Republic of Guatemala and to be part of this important event.
Aquí con el Atlantic Council nos une una larga serie de 2 años de pláticas en común, en donde les hemos tenido virtuales, y hoy por primera vez es un honor para mí estar presencialmente con ustedes.
For 2 years now, we've been in discussions with the Atlantic Council. We've had a lot of Zoom engagements, but this is the first time in person.
Y este es un buen momento para reiterar que la paz y la seguridad internacionales son fundamentales para la coexistencia, aún más en estos tiempos que estamos viviendo.
This is an excellent moment to reiterate that peace and international peace and security are fundamental for coexistence, especially in the times that we are experiencing right now.
Momentos en donde las tensiones son cada vez mayores y que nos confirman que no somos ajenas a ellas.
Times in which tensions are ever growing and only serve to confirm that no one can escape them.
Considero que tenemos la responsabilidad de alzar la voz y de trabajar como región de paz que representa a las Américas ante los efectos negativos que deriven de los conflictos generados en otras latitudes.
We bear the responsibility of speaking out and working together as a region, the Americas, a region that, my apologies, as a region of peace, before these negative effects that have emerged as a result of the conflict taking place in other latitudes.
La República de Guatemala, como un estado de vocación pacífica, promotora de la paz y respetuosa de los principios y valores de la Carta Constitutiva de la Organización de las Naciones Unidas, hace un llamado para privilegiar la diplomacia, la resolución negociada y civilizada en el conflicto derivado de la invasión ilegal, injustificada y no provocada del territorio soberano de Ucrania por parte de la Federación Rusa.
The Republic of Guatemala, a country that promotes peace and is respectful of the principles and values embodied in the Charter of the United Nations Organization, issues a call for diplomacy and negotiated and civilized resolution in the conflict deriving from the illegal, unjustified, and unprovoked invasion of the sovereign territory of Ukraine by the Russian Federation.
En mi reciente visita que realicé a Ucrania, fui testigo de los horrores de este enfrentamiento que ha provocado tanto dolor y devastación, y aprovecho para solidarizarme con el pueblo y el gobierno de Ucrania a quien manifiesto mi total respeto y apoyo aún después de tanto tiempo siguen luchando y resistiendo con patriotismo y honor a través del liderazgo del presidente Volodymyr Zelensky.
In my recent visit to Ukraine, I witnessed the horrors of this conflict, which has caused so much pain and devastation. And I take this opportunity to express my solidarity with the people and government of Ukraine, to whom I express my utmost respect and support, where they have, after so much time, continued to fight and resist with patriotism and honor under the leadership of President Zelensky.
Fuimos y somos testigos de el dolor y de los momentos más oscuros de este siglo que están viviendo las familias ucranianas, pero también vi el amor a su patria que los mantiene unidos y luchando por su nación.
In these darkest times of the century, we witnessed the pain suffered by Ukrainian families, but we also witnessed their love of country that keeps this country, their nation, united.
Guatemala reitera la urgencia de poner fin a este conflicto y buscar la salida pacífica bajo el respeto a la soberanía, la independencia, la integridad territorial, los derechos humanos y la seguridad de todos. No debemos tolerar lo intolerable y mucho menos expresiones de guerra que nos afectan a todos por igual.
Guatemala reiterates the urgency of putting an end to this conflict and seeking a peaceful solution with respect for sovereignty, independence, territorial integrity, human rights, and the safety of all. We must not tolerate the intolerable, and we mustn't tolerate expressions of war which affect us all.
Estimados amigos, hoy se cumplen 7 meses de haberse iniciado este conflicto que vino a sumarse a una dinámica global en crisis a consecuencia de los efectos de la pandemia del COVID-19, el cambio climático, el incremento de los precios de bienes de consumo y energéticos, entre otros, que solo están dejando más vidas que lamentar y una creciente inseguridad alimentaria y nutricional a nivel mundial.
Today marks 7 months since the beginning of this conflict, which came on top of a crisis, a global crisis that was the consequence of the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as climate change, increases in the prices of consumer goods and energy, among others. And all of this is affecting more and more lives and causing increasing food and nutritional insecurity.
Si bien las economías han demostrado su resiliencia ante diferentes emergencias, debemos continuar trabajando juntos mediante acciones coordinadas para salir avantes. Ser testigos de una guerra nos afecta a todos y América Latina y el Caribe no son la excepción.
Although our economies have proven resilient in light of different emergencies, we must continue to work together through coordinated action that will enable us to move forward. Witnessing a war has affected us all, and Latin America and the Caribbean are no exception.
Somos un mundo tan interconectado que las secuelas se expanden significativamente en la región, siendo palpables en diferentes sectores de producción primaria e industriales, particularmente en la agricultura. Sin duda, la incertidumbre nuevamente se cuela en los proyectos de vida de miles de personas.
Our world is so interconnected that the impact grows exponentially through the region, and it makes itself felt in different sectors of primary production and industry, particularly in agriculture. Unquestionably, uncertainty is once again affecting the lives of thousands of people.
En Guatemala hemos impulsado el Plan Nacional de Emergencia del conflicto Rusia-Ucrania, el cual busca proteger a los guatemaltecos a través de los componentes de una política fiscal, protección social, políticas sectoriales como la seguridad alimentaria, energía y combustibles, la política monetaria, cambiaria, crediticia y financiera, entre otras.
In Guatemala, we have put forward the Russia-Ukraine conflict emergency or national emergency plan. This plan seeks to protect Guatemalans through various components of fiscal policy, social safety nets, sector policies in food security, energy and fuels, monetary policy, exchange, credit and financial policy, among others.
Esta acción permite trabajar para que en Guatemala se reduzcan los impactos en términos de inflación y encarecimiento de diferentes productos de la canasta básica, la cual ya se venía atendiendo por fenómenos naturales.
This course of action will enable us in Guatemala to work towards reducing the impacts in terms of inflation, spiking prices of the various elements of the basic food basket, which had already been affected by natural phenomena.
Con las medidas implementadas, se espera que con la contención del gasto se haga un ahorro de 1,000 millones de quetzales, evitando gastos no prioritarios, mantener un flujo de fondos disponible en el presupuesto que permita atender programas de apoyo, no solo por el conflicto de Rusia y Ucrania, sino también por fenómenos nacionales que, como ustedes saben, Guatemala es un país con alta vulnerabilidad climática.
With these measures implemented, we hope that containing price increases will save billions of quetzales and will avoid non-priority spending, maintain flow of funding in the budget, which will make it possible to keep support programs afloat, not just because of the Russia and Ukraine conflict, but also because of natural phenomena. As you know, Guatemala is a country that is highly vulnerable in terms of climate change.
Mientras la crisis entre Ucrania y Rusia persista, no se regresará a la normalidad en los mercados del petróleo y combustibles. Con muchos esfuerzos, Guatemala registra el precio más bajo del diésel y de gasolina superior y regular en comparación con otros países de la región. Asimismo, se mantiene el apoyo social a consumidores del gas propano y la tarifa social del servicio de energía eléctrica, beneficiando a más de 170,000 hogares que consumen menos de 125 kilovatios hora.
As long as the crisis between the Ukraine and Russia persists, there will be no going back to normal in the oil and fuel markets. Through incredible efforts, Guatemala has managed to keep the lowest prices for diesel and premium and regular gasoline compared to other countries of the region. Guatemala has likewise continued to maintain its social supports for consumers of propane gas and to maintain its special rate for power, electric power service. This benefits more than 170,000 households consuming less than 100 kilowatt hours.
Guatemala tiene una economía robusta, pese a los eventos de los últimos años, pero no podemos confiarnos y bajar la guardia. Estamos atentos al comportamiento de los mercados internacionales y por ello es necesario que busquemos soluciones regionales y compartir las lecciones aprendidas y debemos ser mejores socios.
Guatemala maintains a robust economy despite the events of recent years, but we mustn't be complacent or lower our guard. We must pay close heed to the behavior of international markets, and for this reason it is vital that we seek regional solutions and share lessons learned. We must become better partners.
I will not read more, I will speak. Lo que está pasando en Ucrania es algo que ya no puede seguir siendo tolerado. El día de mañana, en mi discurso en las Naciones Unidas, convocaré a los estados a que reflexionemos sobre la urgente necesidad de hacerle cambios al sistema de Naciones Unidas. No podemos seguir tolerando que miles de personas mueran y el mundo se quede en silencio. No podemos seguir tolerando que un país, por grande que se crea, pueda invadir a otro país cuando quiera.
What is happening in the Ukraine must not be tolerated. Tomorrow, when I give my speech at the United Nations, I will call upon the countries to reflect on the urgent need to change the UN system. We cannot tolerate this. We cannot allow thousands of people to die and have the world remain silent. We cannot allow a country, no matter how large, to invade another.
Jamás podré olvidar mi visita a Gucha, una ciudad a 7 kilómetros de Kiev. Jamás podré olvidar al sacerdote de la iglesia ortodoxa de San Andrés.
¿El nombre de la ciudad era?
Gucha.
Gucha. I will never forget my visit to Gucha, a town that lies 7 kilometers outside of Kiev, and I will never forget the priest at the Orthodox church there, Church of St. Andrew.
En el jardín de esa iglesia se encontraron más de 400 cadáveres en fosas comunes.
In the gardens of that church, more than 400 bodies were found there in common graves.
Ni uno solo tenía uniforme militar.
And not one bore a military uniform.
Ni los niños que estaban en esa fosa.
There were children in that grave.
Todos con las manos atadas en la espalda, con scotch en los ojos y con un tiro en la nuca.
All with their hands bound behind their backs, tape over their eyes, and a shot to the back of the head.
Hay que oír las historias de las mujeres y las niñas violadas por el ejército ruso. Hay que ver la destrucción, y no solo en Gucha, sino en las otras ciudades que logramos visitar.
You have to hear the stories of women and girls being raped by the Russian military. You have to see the devastation, not just in Gucha, but in many other towns like it around Ukraine.
Cada hombre, cada mujer, cada niño que muere en una guerra le cuesta a la humanidad el poder decirse humanos.
With every man, woman, or child who dies in war, it becomes harder for humanity to say that it's being humane.
Yo los invito a que alcemos la voz como seres humanos, que no nos quedemos callados. No por Ucrania, porque hoy es Ucrania, es mañana por nosotros, por cualquiera de nosotros, que podemos sufrir las invasiones y ver un mundo impasible, porque están preocupados más por sus relaciones comerciales con otras potencias como la China y Rusia, que realmente defender a un mundo en libertad, en paz, en progreso, pero sobre todo en democracia.
I invite you all to raise your voice. All of us must raise our voices as humans, and not just because it's Ukraine today, because while it's Ukraine today, tomorrow it could be any of us. And we cannot just remain impassive and be more concerned about commercial ties with China and Russia than we are about having a peaceful, democratic world.
Thank you very much. Have a buen provecho.
Please welcome Deputy Director of the Eurasia Center, Melinda Herring, to moderate a conversation with Ukrainian parliamentarian Kira Rudik and Andrei Stavnitzer on the effect of the Ukrainian crisis on future generations.
Ladies and gentlemen, would you please take a seat? Ladies and gentlemen, good things come to those who wait, and this is going to be the best panel. We are so lucky to have two of my favorite people from Ukraine. We have Kira Rudik, who was the COO of Ring, and she is the leader of the Holos political party. It is the most reform-minded political party in Ukraine. Welcome, Kira. And I'm also joined by Andrei Stavnitzer. He's a man of many talents. Before the war, he was the owner of TIS Cargo, and it was a large logistical company near Odessa. And after the war, he's done extraordinary things, and he's going to tell you about it. So we have 13 minutes to jump into it. Andrei, I want to start with you. Before the war, you owned the largest private port outside of Odessa, and you were cutting big deals with Western companies like Cargill. What did you do when the war started? And tell us more about your Help Ukraine Center initiative, please.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Atlantic Council, for having us. So when the war came, war really asks you a very simple question, like, what are you? What can you do best? And then there is no room for discussion. It's basically, you just go with the first answer. So my first answer was logistics, and therefore on the second day of war, in the evening, we have opened doors of our Help Ukraine initiative, which was basically solving the pain point of a lot of people willing to send help into Ukraine, but they had no clue how to do that. Obviously, it was quite dangerous. So we started opening warehouses across Europe, in Poland, in Romania. Recently, we opened in New York. Hopefully, London is on the way as well, where people could deliver cargoes, humanitarian aid, medication, everything, clothes. And we would take it from there, and with the help of our partners, deliver it into Ukraine, like all the way to the eastern part. We had companies like Nova Poshta, Rozetka, Fozzi joining the project, and we would have up to 300-400 people running the show in Lublin, for example. A lot of volunteers, refugees would come and work as volunteers there. All kinds of people, rich, poor, doesn't matter. And they would find salvation, they would find peace in doing that, because all of us Ukrainians right now experience tremendous amount of pain. Yeah. And if you don't do something to help your country, this pain is just unbearable. So the only option how you really can survive it is you work your ass off, excuse my French, and then if you feel less pain, you kind of volume down. So I was happy, and then Olga joined us, Rudneva, she's here. She started running operations. She did a fantastic job, but after a couple of months we realized we don't work our asses off anymore, and we don't spend as much energy as we have to spend. So we moved to another project, and now we're building a hospital, which is focused at reconstruction of faces, limbs, and prosthetics as well. We're going to do PTSD later throughout 2023, but this is our main focus now. We are here in New York fundraising for this project. We already have Richard Branson joining the project, Howard Buffett, Cargill Corporation. We have Liev Schreiber as ambassador. We have Sting and Trudy Styler as ambassadors. And we invite all the guests today to join the project with money or with expertise or with networking, whatever. We take everything in order to open our doors early 2023.
Thank you so much. So let me just put a little context here. Ukraine doesn't have any prosthetic hospitals. So if someone is hurt, they normally have to leave. But Andrei and his team are changing this. They want to build expertise in Lviv Oblast. Lviv Oblast is safe, right? I had coffee there last week. There's nothing going on, right? So they have identified places in Western Ukraine that are safe, and they want to reopen. They want to build this hospital by next year.
We want to have international foreign doctors come and operate there, also transfer technology, transfer knowledge, and teach local doctors how to do proper prosthetics, how to do proper reconstruction. The problem with prosthetics is that a lot of people were taken abroad to US and to UK and to Germany for prosthetics, even in 2014. But most of them have taken those prosthetics off because they don't work. So once they break, these people get in touch with the hospital in the US and say, okay, my prosthetics doesn't work. They say, come and we'll fix it for free. But coming to the US itself is about $7,000, $8,000. So they just take it off. Our goal is to manufacture those prosthetics locally, fix them, service them, and turn Ukrainians into superhumans. And this is how the project is called, actually, superhumans.com.
So it's called the Superhumans Initiative, and I wanted Kira to talk about this as well. There's major employment issues in Ukraine. So part of the thinking, correct me if I'm wrong, is to get Ukrainians to be building these prosthetics.
Exactly.
Super. Before I turn to Kira, something very dramatic happened to you. You had a house in Kiev, and you found out that Russian forces took your home, and you did something crazy. You called the Ukrainian army, and you said, boys, blow up my house. And this was not a small house. Was this an easy decision? What was in your mind?
So I was looking in my webcam and I see Russian soldiers just going around my house and looting the whole village and bringing stuff from other houses into my house. And if you had asked me a year ago what kind of emotion I would have looking at this, I would say fury and anger. But this was not the case. I totally felt disgusted. I felt dirty. And really the only option, it wasn't a long decision, like the only option was to, help our extremely brave military and give them a call, give them the coordinates, so they kicked the bastards out. But unfortunately my house got damaged in the process of it, but I'm happy I could help.
This kind of nonchalant attitude is something you will see everywhere in Ukraine. Everyone feels this way. If you haven't been to Ukraine, get on an airplane. Kiev is safe. I was just there this last week. It's time to come.
You would not believe how adaptable people are. Yeah. You would not feel war if you go to Kiev or to Lviv or to Odessa. It's absolutely fine. Just go and visit and see for yourself.
Yeah, we welcome you. Kira, you are a leading parliamentarian. You're the leader of Holos and the head, and you've been a leading businesswoman for many, many years. We've gotten used to seeing you on TV, sometimes with a gun, sometimes not. Before you were a politician, you were kicking butt in business. But what I want to use your business mind here. Once the war is over, what will it take to convince businesses to come back to Ukraine?
Hello, and thank you so much for having me today. So, we all know our history, and we know that there will be a huge and major development after the war, and the fortunes will be made. So I cannot begin to tell you how many times people pull me aside saying, so what do you think, what do you feel, when is the right time to invest already, we want to be the first, etc. So the answer to that would be how we will end up at this war. And many people ask me, so what do you think, is the peace possible? And my answer is, we do not like the word peace. We actually hate the word peace. Our word is victory.
Can you put your hands together? Thank you.
So when you're talking, because peace, it requires some negotiation, it implies there would be some agreement with the aggressor, but you would not believe how much every single Ukrainian wants to fight and will fight to bring us this sweet word victory. And then the businesses will raise, then my country will raise, and then we will be building up the future where we'll not have to be threatened every time, where we will not have to think about what the future brings, because it will be a fantastic new future. And for that, I want to thank all of you for the international support that we are getting, because we solely rely on so much support that we get, the weapons, the money, the sanctions. It is all coming from you guys. We made this commitment to fight. We made it on the day one, and we never stepped away from it, that we will fight for our country. But we do need all the support that we can get, and we are thankful for it. Today is an incredibly important event for me. because I have my parents in the room, my father and my mother. And my father, stepfather, he is from New York. So when we met for the first time, we were discussing all like the differences in between Ukraine and America and how we see the history. And we were talking about how the US won the Second World War. And he was telling me all about how they won the Second World War. And I was telling, what are you saying? What do you mean? It's us who won the Second World War. And the fact is that none of us was fighting at the front. But the fact and the thing and the choice that our ancestor made was going through the generations. So for everybody who is supporting Ukraine today, what you are doing is generational. It will stay with you. It will stay with your kids. It will stay with your grandkids, that you were on the side of dignity, at the side of the democracy, at the side of the values, and people who are fighting for their own sovereignty, for their freedom. And this is what matters. And for that, I'm extremely thankful to all of you guys here today.
Thank you. Well done. Kira, several of the other panels have talked about the difficulties of winter, about inflation, maybe hyperinflation in Ukraine, about Putin's games with oil and gas. Is Ukraine going to survive the winter? Is the Western coalition in Europe going to hold?
So it will be a question to all of us. This winter will literally be one of the hardest ones since the Second World War, and everybody admits that. Not only for Ukraine, though for Ukraine it will be the hardest, but also for all our allies, because Putin will be pressuring every single country, every single leader to give up, to step aside, to start being like at the edge, to stop being so supportive to Ukraine, to keep giving promises and not giving the help. And it is solely on every single person who supports us today to figure out either it would be a winter of unity, where we'll all stand together and all go through it together and show him that there is no way to break us, or it will be something different, and I don't even want to talk about this different, because I do believe that everybody understands what is on stake here. And it is not only the survival of Ukraine, not only survival of the free world, it's also a question. Are we okay in the modern world for one country to attack another sovereign country and take what they think they like? Is that okay in the modern world for people to be killed just because they exist? I have been to Bucha and Irpin on the first day of liberation. I have seen dead bodies alongside the road. I have talked to women who were raped by Russian soldiers, and I can tell you this should not be happening in Ukraine in 21st century. It should not be happening anywhere, and it is on us right now to stop it, and we are stopping it. Have you seen the recent advances of Ukrainian army? Have you seen? And this is, you know, when we started feeling it, when we learned the news from the front, and we learned that actually we started doing what we all believed in since the day one. But there were so many people in the world who did not believe and thought, yeah, well, they are saying, but what would happen? So we were able to do it because finally we've got all the weapons that we needed. We were able to do it because finally we've got all the supplies that we needed, and we got all this belief from the rest of the world to us. You know, I want every single person who was sending money to Ukraine, who was pushing their politicians to give us the weapons, who was supporting our refugees and making sure that they have roof over their head and a warm cup of tea. When you hear about the victories of Ukrainian army, I want you to look in the mirror and say, we've done this. Because it's not Ukrainians' victory, it's mutual victory. And we show you with the real facts what we can do if you give us the support. We will kick their ass. We will throw them away from our territories. We will regain and we will rebuild Ukraine as this fantastic, progressive country as we all dream of. You know, the most heartbreaking thing is the lost generation of children that we have right now. I'm 35. I dreamed of having the next generation of children that wouldn't know poverty, wouldn't know revolution, wouldn't know the wars, wouldn't know everything that I have witnessed. And now we are robbed of this because we have children, we have teenagers who have seen dead bodies, we have toddlers who know their blood type, we have children who know how to act during the air raid sirens, to go on the ground and cover their heads with their hands. But it will not stop us. We will fix it with the help of Andre and his team. We will fix all of that. I promise to you, same way as for the 6 months we were promising you that we will be winning, and we are winning right now. I'm promising that we will be rebuilding. And the country will be the best country to invest, the best country for innovation. It will be a fantastic country. I promise you I will do everything possible and impossible to make it happen.
And we will be there. We will be there. Amen. Jason, I have to ask one last question to Andre. Andre has his fingers on grain, and he is going to tell us if the grain deal that has been put in place and reduced food prices around the world, will it remain in place? It's about to expire in October. I promise this is the last question. Go ahead, Andre.
I'll make it quick. So before the war, we were handling almost every third ton of grain out of Ukraine. That's about 15 million tons of grain. So I know a lot about grains and stuff. Obviously, Ukraine is a big player in the global food security program. Like almost 1 billion people rely on Ukrainian grain, and there is no way you can substitute it with anybody else. So Putin has negotiated this deal where Russian fertilizers and Russian grain will be allowed to export with Ukrainian grain. And again, he's now renegotiating it. So he's adding additional CPs to this deal. He's saying, okay, I will exit the deal unless you guys allow me to export urea through the urea pipeline, which is going from Russia into Ukraine, and we'll have ships of urea, Russian urea, exported out of Ukraine. If this is not going to happen, I will close the grain deal. And it is extremely important for Ukraine to continue exporting grain, because our farmers, it's a big revenue stream for Ukraine, and our brave farmers who've been seeding and fertilizing, etc., and harvesting during shelling, they understand this, and big part of economy is dependent on this. So what I'm trying to say is that he will not stop unless we stop him. He doesn't understand any other language, commercial, diplomatic, nothing. He only understands power. So just to top up what Kira said, hopefully we can get more weapons and kick them out of our land. Nothing else is really working. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Melinda, Kira, Andre. Really, as you know, the solidarity here with the Atlantic Council is with you. I have the pleasure of closing this absolutely fantastic, enlightening lunch program. I want to just highlight two things. One is a comment President Giammattei said, which is, we must not tolerate the intolerable. Another quote from Minister Kuleba: the only difference between us and you is while we are being attacked by Russian missiles and tanks, Latin America is being attacked by Russian-induced inflation and food insecurity. And I think that this program today shows, as we do at the Atlantic Council, the work I lead at the Adrienne Arsht Latin America Center, along with our colleagues at the Eurasia Center, the interconnection between everything that's happened in the world, the interconnection of Latin America and the Caribbean with the broader global community, which is one of our key priorities as we move forward. I want to again thank our many speakers: President Giammattei, Mr. Kuleba, High Representative Borrell, Mr. Bucado, Undersecretary Fernandez, and all the other speakers. I want to again thank Walmart for their support of this incredibly valuable conversation. I also thank the incredible team led by Maria Fernanda Bosmowski that put this lunch program together. And thank all of you for joining us, and look forward to further engagements as we move forward, and a happy rest of the UN General Assembly week.